I want to take you back to 2016, just after the Brexit referendum. You took a trip to South Wales, to Ebbw Vale. Why did you go there?
So I went to Ebbw Vale. I grew up just outside Cardiff, and I've worked for the Guardian and Observer for 15 years now. And the Guardian and Observer, like all newspapers, doesn't actually have any correspondence in Wales. Mm-hmm. So one of the kind of very interesting things, which is actually very deeply part of the problem, is that journalism, newspapers, over the last 15, 20 years, we've lost our business model. It's been destroyed by Google and Facebook. And so there's very few journalists left, essentially. And so whenever there was a story in Wales which came up, they'd just tell me to go because I'd just go back and visit my mum. So it was the day after the referendum, that's essentially what happened. They were like, go and write a report from Wales. So I headed back there and I thought, well, where shall I go? Where would be interesting to go to? And it was very much to sort of put a pin in the map. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, oh, Ebbw Vale, that's an Iron Bevan's old seat, the man who created the NHS, sort of real heartland Labour, so an interesting place to go. And then I looked at it and I thought, oh, even more interesting, it had one of the highest Leave votes in the country, so more than 70%.
And when you got to Ebbw Vale, what did you see, and how had it changed, incidentally, since that childhood? It must have struck you quite hard.
So I hadn't been back there for a very long time, and the South Wales valleys that I knew as a kid were deeply industrial. There was this massive steel plant in Ebbw Vale, and and going back there, I was wandering around. I didn't even see it. Initially, there's this sort of the town centre, and I was walking around and talking to people about, how they'd voted and what they made of the result. And then I discovered there was this lower bit of the town, and that was where the steel plant used to be, which is, belching furnaces and chimneys. And I went down there, and I was just really taken aback because it looks a little bit like Canary Wharf. It was these kind of gleaming glass and steel buildings, and these big signs everywhere, sort of saying paid for by the European Union. But the people I were interviewing were, unanimously sort of saying, well, I voted for Brexit because the European Union hasn't done anything for me. Mm-hmm. And they were all very much talking about immigration. And that was really the number one thing which came through. And it's very interesting. It's just very striking when I looked at the stats, and actually in that area of the country, anywhere in the United Kingdom, it has one of the lowest rates of immigration in the countryside, in the country.
So there seemed to be a disconnection between what you saw, the reality, and what people were telling you. And clearly your interest was piqued. What was causing that?
Well, it's all still such a mystery. That's the thing which has sort of kept me going over the last 3 years. It has been like sort of following a true crime story in many ways. And I had that sensation that it was a true crime story. And in the process of sort of investigating this, I've discovered that it's an actual crime story. So we now know, actually, that during the referendum, that some very serious crimes took place, breaches of electoral law and of data laws. And the people who oversaw one of the greatest of those crimes, so this electoral fraud, the biggest one, in fact, for more than a century, which took place, which Vote Leave did in this sort of deliberate overspending scheme. That was actually masterminded by the man who's now advising the Prime Minister, Dominic Cummings. And it was overseen by the man who is now Prime Minister. And so we're in this extraordinary situation where we know that was our Electoral Commission has ruled. It said, they broke the law. The campaign has admitted it. It said, yes, we broke the law. It's been referred to the Met Police. But that has just been, it seems to be of no consequence. And so this is the thing which I find really deeply troubling as we go, in the situation where we are now.
So let's delve into that in terms of what some of those allegations and accusations contain. Firstly, the idea that people were presented with things which were not just spin, but they were false. Is that your conclusion?
Well, so it's so interesting. So Dominic Cummings his real sort of skill is in this, he's Mr. Loophole. So you find those gaps that you can exploit. And so one of the gaps was that during an election, we trust our political parties to act like gentlemen, essentially. Our system's based on trust. So you only have to report what you spend after an election. So that was a very key loophole. And then another loophole, which he wrote about finding, was this thing that you cannot say, in Britain, you cannot advertise any product by saying this amazing sparkling water is going to make your teeth whiter and your hair shine. You can't say that because it's a lie, and the Advertising Standards Authority will come after you. But we have no regulation at all around political advertising. So you can literally say whatever lie you want.
The sun will shine brighter after Brexit.
And that is literally what they did.
So what's an example? What's an example of something which you ended up zooming in on, saying, well, there's a lie right there? It wasn't just about
the one which is, and he writes about it so compellingly. So the £350 million a week to the NHS, it wasn't an accidental lie. It wasn't just a slight exaggeration. It was deliberately done so that it became a talking point. So that people go, well, no, actually, he hasn't counted in the rebate, so it's actually 187, because it doesn't matter. Whatever the number is, it's a really big number, and so it's done its job. And so this is the really, really tricky thing about this disinformation, is that actual information can't really combat it.
And when you tried to find out who had done what, who had advertised to whom, on Facebook, to use that example, what did you see?
So it was this kind of voyage of discovery into complete darkness. So this discovery that actually, the campaigns, they very deliberately, the key tool for them in the election, in actually all elections now, was Facebook. And that was where all of the money was spent, and particularly in the last week. But there's no record whatsoever of what happened. So we're used to our politics being conducted with TV advertisements or newspaper advertisements or pamphlets through the door. And that was all kind of out in the public, and it's knowable, and we can see what's being said, and you can hold parties to account. But this thing, which is that you're targeting an individual, and with information which just vanishes, that nobody else sees, that disappears forever. That was the situation that sort of I found, and then this trying to find that evidence and find those answers. And we're still not there, and this is one of the really, really crucial things. So our Parliament has really, it's more than any other in the world, has tried to hold Facebook to account and to summon Mark Zuckerberg to come to Britain and to give evidence and to turn over evidence, and he on refusing. And so we really still don't know what actually happened in this kind of incredibly consequential election that's going to affect this country forever. So, and in doing so, it's shown that we aren't really... The irony is, this is all about taking back control and Britain, the sovereign nation. And actually what it's exposed is that we are no longer a sovereign nation, because Silicon Valley technology companies are more powerful than us, and we're unable to hold them to account. They're beyond British laws and beyond British lawmakers.
Well, we're going to come on to what needs to change, what could change, but I do want to separate out some of these strands a little bit, because somebody will be thinking, well, making outrageous claims about the benefit of voting for your party, it was ever thus. It was happening everywhere, on both sides. The hyper-targeting of voters using social media platforms, whether you're selling Rice Krispies or a political party. What within that, and just give us a sense of what you picked up about the extent to which someone might be thinking they were all at it.
Well, it's really funny, isn't it? Because people do say this. There is this, I would say, well, they broke the law. And so you're kind of either okay with breaking the law, or that's not okay.
And just to be clear, the breaking of the law was on the falsehood or on the overspending?
On electoral law. So essentially the absolute foundations of our electoral laws, of our democracy, is about controlling how much money is spent in them. This incredibly British thing, we believe in a level playing field, and that's been the basis of it. And so that's why we have spending limits, and they're tightly controlled. And in any other election in Britain, in a by-election, in a general election, if you break those spending limits and you're found out, well, then we set the result aside,
right,
and we have another election.
Right, and of course, as you know...
But in the referendum, it wasn't set up to be sort of legally binding.
Okay, so as you know better than anyone, this doesn't fix our problem, because all parties may put their hands up, say fair dues, transparency, here's how much we've spent, but I can't say a thing about all of those other funds that have been received. So how do we begin to get our heads around the gaping holes in the system? Because surely some of those ads could be funded from anywhere. We literally don't know where.
Well, so that's exactly the situation we're in at the moment. So Damien Collins wrote a piece this morning, I think it was in Politico, and he makes the case that we urgently need emergency legislation.
Right. So he's chairing the Commons Select Committee.
Yes, so Damien Collins, Conservative MP who was chairing the DCMS committee in Parliament, who led this really wide-ranging inquiry into fake news and disinformation. And he has said that, and that their entire report has said, that our electoral laws don't work anymore. They're not fit for purpose. Our elections are not safe. We're incredibly vulnerable. And so here we are everybody's talking about heading into another election. But the one thing we know is that if we do so, it can't be free. I mean, I cannot see how it can be free and fair.
So we're going to sort of go through the gears a bit because we've got a limited time. In a nutshell.
And there's so much dystopia to cover.
In a nutshell.
I feel that I've just given you one bleak aspect,
okay.
But there are so many.
You have a bleak off. In a nutshell, what do you want Facebook to do?
Facebook, but I don't want Facebook to do anything. I want our government to make Facebook do something. So I want our Parliament has demanded that Mark Zuckerberg comes and gives these answers. They've now banded together with 12 different parliaments around the world to form this grand international committee. But the government has been absolutely silent.
Okay, but that's top of your list. If you were sat one-to-one with Mark Zuckerberg, do you genuinely have no requests about how that platform can be...
Well, Mark, the thing is that it's very hard to tell a company that it is destroying democracy, and but I did, I have done that with Mark Zuckerberg, and guess what? It doesn't make any difference. So companies are there to grow bigger and stronger and to make more money, and that is essentially what he's doing. But in the meantime, he's created this monopoly that, not just democracy, of course. We know there's, for example, the United Nations found that Facebook was behind the inflaming of racial and ethnic hatred in Myanmar, which led to the deaths of, I think it's 100,000 people. This is extraordinary power concentrated, not just in one company, but in one man, actually.
You have said before that Brexit and Trump are inextricably linked. Just explain how. Because this company, Cambridge Analytica, which was one of the things which sort of set me on this journey, it was just very central in the Trump campaign. It was the company, the data company, which was powering Trump's campaign. And Steve Bannon was running? So Steve Bannon, who became Trump's campaign manager and then he was his chief of staff, he was the vice president of Cambridge Analytica. And they were introduced to Nigel Farage here and offered their services. So is your point, Carole, that it was the Petri dish, the experiment, or more that the influence also ran throughout the campaign? There's there's lots of different links between all the individuals and all the companies and the data. And yes, so what Nigel Farage's associates, this guy, Andy Wigmore, he told me, he was like, well, of course Trump's data firm wanted to help us because we were the same family. And he said to me Brexit was the Petri dish for Trump.
was a sort of dry run. You try it in a much smaller place, and before, you know, a few months later.
So it sounds to me like the idea that a company might say, as one very prominently has said today, we want to be on the right side of history. We want to get our house.
Yeah, it was really compelling.
But you don't buy that. I mean, from Mark, from the Googles, from the Facebooks, you say they're not going to do it.
Well,
they need to be forced.
They haven't said that. I mean, that was really striking. Roger, wherever he is, yeah. I wasn't expecting that, actually. It was really interesting, because that was the sort of challenge that I put to Silicon Valley when I gave this TED talk. And I think it made them really, really deeply uncomfortable. But the upshot of it that I see is just denial.
And has it, I mean, 10 million views later, has it triggered things?
I think the Cambridge Analytica scandal, as it's called, I think it has definitely made waves in the world. So a lawyer last night was telling me, in the worlds of data, companies are having to look very, very seriously about this, and the sort of customer trust is broken in that way. But these are still massive global monopolies, and every day they are accruing more power, and that is sort of hasn't changed in any way, let's say.
Well, I want to take some questions from our audience, but before I do, the final question from me was going to be, Carole, we talked about the South Wales correspondent no longer. Your take on the current state of journalism?
So, I mean, I think I was asked last night, is that, you know, how do we fight disinformation? And really the only thing I feel that there is this, I used to really despair about journalism and the future in all sorts of ways. And now I've just really see how fundamental it is to everything, to have any hope of holding any of these companies or politicians or anything to account. Then we really, really need a far more robust, well-resourced press than we have.
Right.
And I'm finding it incredibly alarming, actually, just how threadbare it is. And that, again, has been because of the impact of the fact that all of our advertising went to Google and Facebook, and it hasn't been replaced.
So to what extent does it matter who funds the journalists?
I just think if you think that everything we kind of hold dear and everything that has made your businesses possible, having, you know, this proper legal framework, having a judicial system that works, having a parliament, a parliamentary system that you know that works. But we're entering different territory now. We can see it. I mean, that was also in the first talks. These are not normal times. Having a prime minister who closes parliaments unlawfully, that this is not a normal time. No. And this is, as I say, a prime minister who's got away with leading this campaign, which we know broke the law. And I just wonder how many other laws we're going to see potentially broken, and for that not to seemingly matter.
Okay, well, there will be reactions in the room. There might be questions. Please raise your hand, sir, in the fourth row, and then we'll come down to the front, and I'm looking out here. Guess what I've got? I've got a throwable mic. It's in no way supposed to be flippant or try it. You're rolling your eyes, sir. You wish you hadn't suggested you'd answer a question. There you go.
Whoa.
Good. Oh, there you go. Sorry to raise the tone a bit there, but anyway, feel free to say who you are, and you don't have to.
What do I do? Speak into... Oh, there. I've got it. I have to declare an interest. I'm a passionate reader of both of your newspapers, The Observer and The Guardian, and a great fan of yours. The question I wanted to ask you, in a way, bears on that. My family knew Catherine Graham, and I was there when she had to make that very brave decision about whether or not she was going to potentially sacrifice her place as Queen of Washington Society or follow the truth. When Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, I thought, now, isn't that wonderful? Because all the money is gone, but he's got all the money in the world. And what better legacy to leave the world as the richest man in the world with a great newspaper that tells the truth. And it started out that way, and then it began to decline, and he got rid of journalists. My belief in the question I would ask you is that it seems to be coming back up. The Washington Post seems to be taking that sort of position. A very good thing. However, the terrifying aspect of it is that you have this great organ of truth in journalism under the control of a very rich man. What is your view about that?
Well, I couldn't put it better. I mean, I think you've encapsulated it brilliantly there. The Washington Post is still a fantastic newspaper. It's actually been really brilliant on reporting on the Trump administration. But Jeff Bezos, his company is it the most powerful in the world right now? It's certainly one of them. And not just in retail, but in the cloud services, in so many ways. And actually, it's one of my entry points into writing about the sort of tech dystopia that I now is my sort of full-time job. I went and spent a week in an Amazon warehouse in Wales a few years ago, and it was just shocking in that that also was a black box where it felt that workers' rights were so eroded. I was walking 15, 16, 17 miles a day in that warehouse.
Well, Carole, we hear.
Sorry, that was.
No,
but yes. I mean, it's.
But we hear, don't we, the Chinese war between editors and owners. Do you buy it?
I mean, no.
Clear,
when was the last time you read a fantastic expose of Rupert Murdoch in the Times?
Indeed, it's a good question. I can see a question at the back. However, I'll jump to the front first, and then the lady at the back. Thank you. Belinda, thank you. You could have. Why don't you chuck it forward? That'll be good fun. Watch this, sir. Over your head. Oh, dear. It's all gone wrong. From the mic. Here we go. We're on the handheld. Thank you. And I'll get the clock.
Thank you very much, Carole. Amazing, all of your work. I have a quick question, which is, in this work where you're so prominent, do you ever feel unsafe?
Yes. But, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if I should actually say this, if this is a bit controversial, but I see that Mishcon de Reya is a sponsor. And, one of the threats, there are many threats to journalism at the moment, many, many threats. And they are increasing every single day. And we have seen really brave journalists, terrible things happen to them in other countries. And it's harder and harder, I think, for us to do our jobs. And it's harder because we're in an online space where we're exposed and we are attacked relentlessly. It is harder because we have the likes of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson calling what we do fake news. It is harder because we live here in a country where rich and well-funded people can attack through the legal system journalists doing their job, which is happening to me at the moment. And some of these people are also, they have contacts to organised crime and private intelligence companies and all sorts of things. You don't really know what you're dealing with. I think that's the...
Can I say something which I think a lot of people might be thinking, including me, which is there is a huge well of gratitude for what you're doing, and it takes huge amounts of courage.
Thank you. I actually find it incredibly touching because I get this amazing support, and I think it really is. It's so profound at the moment that most people who we here know, they are like decent and honest and kind and trying to do the right thing. And I really profoundly think that. But we are in a space where people who are not like that, who are badly intentioned, who are just supremely ambitious, who are unstable, they are the people who now have the balance of power. And that's true in Britain, and it's true in America, and it's true in other places. And I think they are a threat to kind of everything, really, that we, most of us stand for, I think.
Understood. I think we've got time for just one or two here. One or two more questions. Please, at the back. Feel free to say who you are, and you don't have to.
I went to university, and I'm 65. And if that helps you know how I voted, I have very many friends who also went to university and who also 65 who voted differently. I don't want to turn this into a personal comment, but I would like to express an alternative point of view and ask a different question, which is, I wonder if you really think you have your priorities correct. We still have free speech in this country, whether through social media, whether through conferences, whether through television, although I think one could question the BBC as to whether or not they're entirely independent. But I wonder what you think about Mr. Putin. I wonder what you think about Mr. Erdogan. I wonder what you think about the Chinese, and the list goes on. And I'd like to know whether you ever think about what goes on elsewhere and whether that isn't actually just as important.
Good question. If you could answer that in just 60 seconds or less, Carole. We have got a coffee break to go. No.
So I do think about those examples all the time, and I particularly think about the journalists who are trying to do those jobs in those countries under such difficult circumstances. But it's not really true that we have free speech here. We have incredibly expensive speech here. So I am being sued by Mr. Aaron Banks, who was the funder behind the Brexit campaign, for a line in that TED talk. And so he's able to come after. He's not trying to. He's coming out. He's accusing me of defamation because of this journalism I've been publishing for 3 years in The Guardian and Observer. But he's choosing to come after me personally because I'm more vulnerable, because it's at a cost to me. And it's already having a chilling effect on my ability to report further and what I can say in public. That is not free speech. That is speech owned by millionaires who use certain legal companies. But, no, actually, I must say, I'm very grateful to Mishcon de Reya for no longer having Mr. Aaron Banks as a client. So congratulations.
Oh, good. Well, cheers. Cheers to that. Okay, let's get back to the banks we do approve of. Is there a way for somebody to bolster your coffers? I'm just going to ask. I'll probably get told off for this in the interval.
Well, I have a GoFundMe fund for the legal action and to support more investigation and journalism.
Okay, noted. Thank you. So aside from cheering you on, and
but also,
other...
I think just paying for news in some way, subscribing to a newspaper or it's just that matters.
This is what I was going to ask. What, as we go into this chance to connect with each other, what would your message to this room be? Influential, connected. We can support newspapers. We can speak out.
I think we've all been really complacent, and I think that we've all underestimated actually how fragile the sort of compact we have is, and we haven't really appreciated that we do need these safeguards, and one of the safeguards we need is journalism, and that means it's not ideological. This really isn't about left or right or Brexit or not Brexit. It is simply about this thing of holding power to account.
Well, this has been like the tip of the iceberg, and there is a treasure trove of reports and very, very, very hard work from Carole and your colleagues as well.
Yeah, very much my colleagues. It's always a team effort.
But I just want to say thank you. Like any invitation, the quickest thing you can say is no, and we are very grateful that you said yes today. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.